and the third category, which is unproductive hours. Because we talked about delay, but there's also another aspect, which is disruption and loss of productivity, which is probably one of the most difficult type of claims, both to justify and to quantify. I had an electrical subcontractor who had meticulous daily records, and every day he recorded, I had this many unproductive hours and this is why. So that was really easy to support his loss of productivity claim, which is essentially additional hours.
This is the Contender's Edge podcast, where ideas challenge institutions and underdogs rise to lead in construction. Hosted by Zulq, bringing you no BS insights, real stories, and tech-smart strategies to outbuild the giants in the construction industry. Let's get to work.
Welcome, Richard, to our podcast, The Contender's Edge, the podcast designed for people who are contending, not necessarily just the small guys, but also the big guys. So it's my esteemed pleasure to have a very dear colleague of mine in the industry, but more importantly, the son of a very good friend, a mentor of mine who taught me what I know about estimating, Steve Fogarasi. So I wanted to give tribute to Steve here, Richard. Sorry, I'm going to make this a little sucky moment. The Steve Fogarasi, who's Richard's dad, I worked alongside with him in a previous life. I'll name the company. It was called Canadian Contracting. And Steve ran he was VP of estimating. That was his official title, Richard?
Yes, well, VP, and then he was, estimating.
Yeah. So I was this young little whippersnapper that knew nothing about estimating, and Steve offered to take me under tutelage in my after hours to learn how to estimate, which became invaluable when I went to start my own company later on in the future. So Richard, I love to rave about your dad. So I'm glad we're connected because you're your father.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I've learned a lot from him as well, and many other people. I think he was always big on mentoring and passing on his knowledge and sharing his experiences. So I know a lot of people feel the same way about him, which is great. It's great to know.
Yeah, no, a great guy. I got lots of stories, a lot of wine bottles in his drawer, wine bottles when we traveled through Chicago. But Steve Fogarasi was he was a gentleman, absolutely a scholar, and a great mentor to have in my life. So, Richard, I thank you for sharing your dad with us for a number of years.
Yeah, no problem. Wine always gets the juices flowing. So,
it works, right? It works.
Exactly.
Maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit, Richard.
Sure. So I'm Richard Fogarasi. By way of background, I'm a civil engineer. But I also have an MBA. So after my engineering degree, I wanted to know a little bit more about the business and financing side of construction as well. The first part of my career I've spent on the contractor side. So I worked my way up from field engineer, superintendent, project manager. And for the past about 20 years now, I've been on the consulting side, mainly on claims consulting, dispute resolutions, and eventually working my way into some expert services, being a delay and quantum expert in construction disputes.
Awesome. So highly qualified, obviously. You, unlike some of the people who might be in the industry, you actually came from within the ranks of the field, and that's very important for people to know.
Yeah, and I think it is important for anybody who's sort of purport to be a delay or quantum expert to have had some site experience, because it's difficult to be an expert in something that you've never actually done or experienced. So I'm really grateful about for my construction background, because that taught me a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, I mean, really, we've had multiple conversations in the past. We talked about the idea of disputes. They never really start with any bad intent. They kind of just ultimately snowball to things that are out of control. It's all around us, whether you're in Canada or United States or even in Europe. Disputes are a real part of being in construction, right?
Yes, unfortunately, and as you said, it's never every project when it starts. Everybody celebrates. Yes, contractor celebrates. We got the project. The owner celebrates. We got a contractor. We can put the shovels in the ground, and everybody's great friends until the first issue happens.
Yeah, I've always said the honeymoon period is during, we're courting each other during the tendering phase. The marriage happens when we sign the contract and we consummate the wedding. And then we get into every standard typical relationship that at a certain period of time, some projects which get slightly off the rails get into that acrimonious phase, which ends up into divorce in a lot of instances, right?
Yes, unfortunately, it is.
Yeah.
And again, the unfortunate part is that a lot of these things, history just keeps repeating itself. It's always predictable, and and there are really issues on all sides, both on the owner's designer side, the contractor side, and sort of third party or other issues. And the main issues are always the same. So from an owner designer side, it's either missing information, incomplete, missing design, or unclear contracts, and of course changes. On the contractor side, a lot of it is resource issues, coordination issues. Some of it is beyond the contractor's control, especially recently in Canada. We've been facing a lot of labor shortages, supply chain material issues, lead times, price volatility for materials. But these are unfortunately typically the contractor's risk to manage. And then the third group of issues, which are sort of beyond anybody's control, and a lot of it again might be typical to Canada, is a lot of permitting and regulatory issues, municipal approvals, environment reviews, and then also any unforeseen site conditions. So soil conditions, buried utilities, buried structures. And it's what I've listed off is probably, when you have an issue on a job, it probably falls into one of those categories.
Which is really interesting thing. So, I mean, we're going to have all kinds of people listening to this podcast. We're going to have the design community, we're going to have the contracting community, and the ownership community. And you really listed off a series of stuff that happens that some of it fits in the owner's bucket,
Yep.
some of it's fitting in the designer's bucket, and some of it's fitting into the contractor's bucket. So let's touch on the really sensitive topic where contractors have to manage risk with regards to workforce and material delivery. What are your thoughts on schedules nowadays? I mean, they all seem to be unrealistic. Doesn't matter who you ask. Nobody's actually hit a schedule. So I call it the biggest lie ever told on a job site is your baseline schedule, because it's bullshit within a month.
Well, it depends. It depends how it's created. I mean, a lot of times a baseline schedule is created to hit, and I would say an artificial completion date that's stipulated in the tender, and contractors are sometimes unwilling or sometimes unable to push back on that and tell the owner that this completion date that you're asking for is unrealistic. What I'm saying, unable is, as we know, sometimes tenders don't allow for any qualifications. So by submitting a tender, you sort of agree to completion date that you might know that unrealistic, and you just hope for the best, and you hope that you will be able to work around it and either make it happen somehow, or after the award you'll be able to get some relief and some extension.
So would you recommend, based on your experience, that you actually build a realistic schedule and then see how you can fit it into the baseline schedule of the contract, or have an open discussion up front?
Yes, I mean, that's the key, what you just said last, an open discussion up front. I mean, you should definitely have a realistic schedule, and if that realistic schedule doesn't meet with the owner's expectation, then you should have that conversation as early as possible. And again, because some of the tendering guidelines restrict you from having that conversation before you submit your tender, you might have to have that conversation after award, but definitely as soon as possible after award.
So, which brings us into the question, like, where's the design community fall into this? I mean, they're the ones that are telling the clients how long it's going to take. I just recently had a conversation with a design firm, and I said to them, you guys spent 3 years designing a building on paper, and you give the contractor 52 weeks to finish it. Right?
Yep.
So why did it take that long to draw it, but yet the contractor who has to physically get all the stuff put together and assemble it on the job site, why are they given the least amount of time? So, like, where does the design community fall into? Because quite honestly, most owners say, hey, I have an idea, I want to build a building, I have this much money, can you give me a project? Right? They're not sophisticated owners.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure whether the deadlines come from the design community. I mean, usually it's owner driven, because for a designer, I don't know why it matters to him. Owners usually have ideas of when they want to sort of, it either falls into sort of a group of bigger projects where they need one project finished just so they can start and get going with other stuff. But I think definitely, yes, designers, if they are advising the owners, they should have somebody with some construction experience who can prepare at least a high level schedule on their behalf that can advise the owner what the realistic timeline is.
And it's not that I want to bash up on the design community, because they have clients that are designers, but I know sometimes the designers are talking and the owners don't want to listen. So what's the message for the owners, saying, hey, listen, you're not taking advice from industry professionals, you're going on some financial decision, which ultimately is going to come and bite you in the derriere anyways.
Well, then the owners have to understand the risk that they're taking. Just by forcing a contractor into a completion date that's unrealistic, it's not going to make it happen. It's just going to lead to disputes. And this has especially been a hot topic recently, again, since COVID, since we had a lot of these material issues. And I've seen contracts where bidders ask the question. Bidders basically say, in our experience, for example, electrical materials and equipment, we see lead times of 5 to 10 to even longer. And based on those lead times, we don't think your substantial performance date is achievable, and this is what we suggest as a realistic date. And some owners and designers will take that and accept it and make changes. In some instances, in this instance, I've seen the response basically saying, well, we're keeping the completion date, but we understand your concern, and we're willing to look at any delivery issues on a case-by-case basis, and if it's supported, then we're willing to look at extending the time.
Which is really interesting. So in my world, I never really ask questions during the bid phase. I'm like, listen, at the end of the day, why do I need to? I'm not here to clarify your homework for you. So would you recommend for contractors who are bidding the job to qualify their bids from a subcontractor level? Say, hey, listen, I know you want to do this in 12 months, but man, it's going to take me 8 months to get the materials. So buyer beware. Like, do not think that this job, like, should right there be on their quote. That if you accept my quote and we get into a contract, probably not going to hit your schedule.
You can do that, but depending on, especially on the contractor side, depending on what's in the tender, that might render your quote uncompliant. So you have to be careful. And that's what I'm saying. If there's an opportunity to bring it up, I mean, that's why the question and answer is a perfect opportunity, because you can bring it up. At least you voice your concern. If it's not accepted or if you get shut down, at least it's on the record that this was a risk that was identified early in the process. And definitely bring it up as soon as, if you do get the job, bring it up as soon as you can after award and start the conversation.
Now, I mean, that's really talking about where the problems are really started, is that the baseline schedule is a little bit off the original set, right?
Yeah.
And most contractors are banking on something else is going to happen, so I'll get my relief because when something else happens, it's not my fault anymore. But I think that when you look at it, the minute you get into delays and you get into claims, there's no one winner. They're all losers. Like, so all the parties are losers. The question is the varying degree of loserness that you're going to end up living with, right?
Exactly. And it's a lot of the times I mean, we went through the different issues and causes, but ultimately a lot of this comes down to personalities and emotions. And I think as a contractor, you have to be careful on how you approach these things and make sure that you pick your battles. What I always like to say is put your reasons above emotion, because when you led by your emotions, it's really easy to get carried away, and then it just spirals down to something that you don't want it to go.
Which is actually a perfect segue to my next list of questions, where we're going to take the emotion out of it. So delay isn't really a feeling; it's a fact, right? And you got to prove the fact. So what are some key points that you can suggest to anyone listening? Say, hey, this is how you prove delay, right?
Yeah. So as you said, yes, delay isn't a feeling, and sometimes it is really hard to recognize at the time when you're in the midst of a job and you're busy and you're focusing on what you're going to do today, tomorrow. How you're going to get things done. One thing you have to keep in mind, that just being slowed down is usually not enough. In order to have a successful delay claim, you have to prove that there was a delay, the delay was on the critical path, and it impacted the completion date. And in order to do that, you do need, as much as you don't like the baseline schedule, really, that's where it all starts. So you do have to have a credible baseline schedule, and you have to link not just a credible baseline schedule, but you have to have good updates that show what actually happened, and then you can link the delay events to the impacts on the schedule. Because
I think that's where there's a lot of challenge for contractors, is that the person who put down the schedule is not thinking about all the critical items that could potentially trip the schedule. They're just saying, hey, how do I cram everything in, link it up, make it look like a pretty red line in some fashion to the end for critical path, and I've finished my chore. Because really most people treat a baseline schedule as a chore, when in reality it's a very pivotal and a monumental document that you're producing out of your office.
For contractors, anything that doesn't help them, do the work and put the building or whatever they're building up is just a a nuisance and an additional thing that maybe I'll do it because it's required by the contract, but I'll just do the absolute minimum just so I can get away with it, as opposed to just investing a little bit time and effort up front and creating a tool that's going to help them both throughout the project to sort of manage and monitor the project, and also if they get into a dispute or a delay situation, it will also help them support their case.
Yeah, and I think what both of us are really saying is that your baseline schedule, if you're going to build one, build it properly, or just put a bunch of lines on a piece of paper and pray to God, right?
Yes,
see if that works out.
Exactly. Yeah, like build it properly and maintain it properly. So again, when you get into a situation where you need support, you have that support.
So we touched on the notion that it's not a feeling, it's a reality. But you know what? The number one thing that I've seen that comes out during litigation is everybody wants a copy of the superintendent's daily reports. And I've read enough in my lifetime to know most of them aren't worth looking at. And then I've read the one where you're like, thank you, that was the golden nugget that I needed. So what are the golden nuggets that you suggest or you could recommend that really benefit people who are actually preparing minutes of records, even safety inspections, site inspections from a designer's perspective? Like, these are the things that kind of help everyone get organized to say, hey, I'm going to defend my position or I'm going to have a position.
Yes. So a lot of contractors are good at recording in a daily report of things that have happened. But what's equally as important potentially is things that supposed to happen but did not happen, and why they did not happen. So it's not just what you did in the day, but you should also start with what was your plan for the day, and what was the work that completed. And I also know that some of the smart subcontractors also use the daily report or a separate other daily log to track hours into three main categories, like hours that I've spent on base contract, hours that I've spent on changes, and the third category, which is unproductive hours. Because we talked about delay, but there's also another aspect, which is disruption and loss of productivity, which is probably one of the most hard or most difficult type of claims, both to justify and to quantify. But I have seen when I had an electrical subcontractor who had meticulous daily records, and every day he recorded, I had this many unproductive hours and this is why. So that was really easy to support his loss of productivity claim, which is essentially additional hours.
Which is really interesting. So, I mean, really what we're talking about is, hey, what did I plan to get done versus what did I actually get done? But more importantly, why didn't I get what I wanted to get done? And
yes, and how long did it take me to get it done, what I had to get done? Because even if you get done what you were supposed to, but it took you twice as long, that's going to be a problem for you if you're a subcontractor.
And speaking to everyone in the universe, it's shocking. I'm going to say this again. I learned this from your dad and from my time at Canadian Contracting, which now is an Obayashi company. Look-ahead schedules. It's shocking how many companies don't do look-ahead schedules of what they're planning. So you got your baseline schedule, which says, hey, on a macro level, this is what I plan to do. And your look-ahead schedule is more about, hey, what do I plan to get done in this week or two that supports my baseline?
Yes, so look-ahead schedules, again, are very important. And they go back to what we talked about, is what is your plan for the day, for the week. And again, talking about look-ahead schedules and the use of look-ahead schedules, especially from a perspective of a subcontractor, don't be afraid to, once you get those look-ahead schedules, mark them up and send them back to the contractor with what actually happened. So, and again, from speaking about my perspective, after the fact, when you're trying to look at what happened, and I had some of these jobs where the subcontractor did that, so I had a series of look-ahead schedules that were marked up and basically said, yep, nope, this didn't happen, this didn't happen, this didn't happen, which gives you a pretty good track record of where things sort of got delayed and were planned and didn't happen for weeks and weeks and weeks. That would show up, but for various reasons, they wouldn't happen.
And I have a bit of a mantra. As a general contractor, I spent a lot of time as a general contractor and had the privilege of being owning a subcontracting company. I think it's almost up to the subcontractors to produce schedules, look-ahead schedules, because when your workers aren't actively working on a job site, those are your non-productive hours that are hitting and burning off your man-hour production.
Yes, and I don't know if they would, well, they could prepare lookout schedules, but really they should have the input on the lookout schedules.
Absolutely, I think
Yeah.
it takes the whole village to put the schedule together. But the onus is usually left on one or two people that says, "Hey, you do it. Tell me what I got to get done." And then when things start to derail, the reality is everyone runs for cover and say, "Well, hey, I gave you a chance to step up, but you didn't," right?
Yeah.
But nobody's winning. Like I'll still say this: you're in a litigation situation. First of all, better have some really deep pockets to win. Secondly, is that you're probably going to get blamed for some of it too, right?
Yeah, I mean that's really definitely you don't want to get into that situation. You hope you want to get this resolved and settled somewhere as early as possible in the process.
And one of the things, Richard, I'd really like to touch on before we get on to what we're going to talk about is survival kit. Contract compliance. It's such a delicate subject. The contract writes out the rights and obligations of all parties, but yet very few people exercise their rights and obligations under the contract.
And
What's your viewpoint?
Shockingly few people even read their contract. I've spoken to contractors who come with things like this. Say, okay, I have this claim, and I said, well, have you read this clause in the contract, or have you read that clause in the contract, which basically says you have no case. I mean, you can't claim for this. And one important thing, which again is probably, I know it's in Canada, it's very important. I'm sure it is in other jurisdictions as well, but it's important and it's enforced here are the notice requirements. And that's what a lot of contractors don't realize, that this is, at least from what I've seen, it's one of the biggest reasons why claims often fail when they got in front of an arbitrator or a judge. Because the first thing the courts will always say, let's see the contract. And a lot of contracts say, if no notice, no entitlement. So if the contract says you have to submit a written notice, it says within a specific number of days, within certain details, and you don't comply with it as a contractor, you can very easily, even if you have a real delay, unfortunately, a lot of them get dismissed just on that basis.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't appreciate that when it gets to a judge, the judge doesn't have a technical background. He's not meant to have an empathetic background. He's reviewing it on a factual basis, and on the factual basis, the contract is his starting point. Most judges understand contract law. Right? They know how to read a contract and tell you exactly what you're supposed to do.
That's their job.
If you ask them, hey, how do I drill caissons? They're going to say, I don't know. And the ones that pretend like they know, the weekend warriors that go to Home Depot, they still don't know construction. They just kind of know that they went as a weekend warrior and they bought some stuff from Home Depot and the guy told them as a pro how to do it. So it's buyer beware that your contract says, here's your rights and remedies and when to exercise them. And there's a polite way to exercise them, and there's also the harsh way to exercise them. And I think if you exercise it on a polite level, you're probably, it'll at least you complied with the contract. Right? There's no gray area there. You've applied it. You politely said, hey, I'm just, in accordance with this, we want to let you know that we've got some issues and concerns on the job site. We can't quantify them yet. We don't know the full extent. But just a gentle reminder, hey, we got a problem. Right? So we talked about...
Don't be shy. Don't be shy about following the contract. That's the bottom line.
I agree with you. I mean, if there's somebody that doesn't like the terms and conditions of the contract, you got to wonder why you're in bed with them anyways.
Well, I mean, it's the owner's terms and conditions, right? So how can they blame you for following them?
But there's an emotional side. They're like, why are you doing this? Are you setting me up for a claim? Are you setting me up for a claim? And the reality is that there probably is going to be a claim. If I got to send you that letter anyways, chances are it's coming down the pipeline. So I might as well protect my right. Awesome. So we have a little bit of time here. I want to talk about a survival kit. And, we talked earlier about a subcontractor survival kit, but reality, it's a contractor survival kit, right? And let's talk about a couple common things that happen. Verbal instructions on a job site. What do we do? Yeah.
So very common situation. And if it leads to a he said, she said situation. So my recommendation is always, even if you get a verbal direction, once you get back to the trailer or you get back to the office, just send a quick email just with a recap, basically saying, okay, just to confirm our discussion, this is what was said, this is what we're doing, and just follow up in writing. And and hopefully you'll also get a response, even if just a quick response that's saying yes, agreed. At least you have a record of what was said, and it's no longer just a verbal.
Perfect. That's an easy thing to do depending on the tools you have at your disposal. In the email world, I'm going to say, hey, if you're going to send out an email, make sure your subject line is very clearly defined. Because if you need to look it up, it's going to be looking it up months, years after the fact. So make sure that you can tag it, flag it, and find it, more importantly.
Yes.
Not mess it.
So that's, again, for what we do in the claims world, that's a really big issue. To make sure that if you're emailing about an issue, usually try to keep an email to one issues if it's possible, one issue. And because there's nothing worse than these long email chains that start out with a subject and then 4 or 5 emails later you're talking about something completely different. So as you said, years later you're trying to find emails relating to an issue, and that they're impossible to find because they're just all over the place.
Perfect. RFIs, they've got a lot of nicknames: request for information, request for clarification, was it request for extra work or extra pay, depending on who you're asking. So RFIs, and again, I think most contractors do this. They keep a log and they keep an eye on, and they're always the first one to scream and shout when they don't get a response within whatever it is, 5 days or 10 days or sooner. And they should do that. You should keep a log and you should keep updating it. I think the important thing to recognize is not just what the question is, but what it is on site that it's affecting. So what is the work that's being affected by this answer or the lack of this answer? And again, a lot of contractors say, well, I have this question about a structural steel dimension, but I mean, it's not urgent because structural steel is not happening till 2 months from now. But what they don't realize, well, that answer is just a start to get the shop drawings done, then get the steel fabricated, and before you know it, you think it's not urgent, but really you've already passed the time that you needed that information just to make sure that you'll have the material on site when you need it. So you have to be a little proactive and look forward and make sure you know what the RFI is affecting. Yeah, I think that's really important, that being very explicit about the consequential impacts of the lack of an answer. And putting in there, it's going to delay the job is not an answer. It's not a consequential. It's more like withhold production of shop drawings, and after approval of shop drawings, it's going to take 20 weeks of fabrication and 2 weeks of delivery. So take your time, but just understand that there's a domino effect after the effect.
And another potential tool or place to track this or bring this up are the meeting minutes, site meeting minutes, because I see a lot of site meeting minutes that says RFI, see attached log, and that's it. But I think the site meeting minutes are a perfect place to both discuss and to record any RFIs or other issues, changes, or other things for that matter, that will or are impacting your progress. And don't be shy again to bring it up specifically and make sure that they're recorded in the minutes, as opposed to just referring to the log that's always getting attached.
Yep. Additional work. We all do it. We all do it without paperwork sometimes. Usually a dangerous idea, but it happens. It's because everyone's trying. Like I said, we're all in the honeymoon marriage phase. The divorce proceedings haven't really started. We're just getting there.
Yes. Again, it comes back. We spoke about the contract. Most CCDC contracts say that you shall not do any extra work without a written and approved change order. And yes, 99% of the time, contractors just want to move things along and they go ahead. But recognize that yes, you're trying to help the job, but you're taking a risk. So again, if you do that, make sure you have at least some other kind of sort of written acknowledgement or instruction to proceed. But ideally, you want to follow the contract and say, hey, I need an approved change order, or if there's no time, then I'll need a change directive to proceed with this additional work.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of fear for asking for a change of directive, because it really, in actuality, in all contracts, whether north or south of the border, there is a directive mechanism that says I'm willing to exercise this work on a time and material basis versus a lump sum quote. And prior to a change directive, people forget that you have to have agreed upon labor rates. So that should be step one of every contract, is say, hey, these are my labor rates for charge out. And just put it on the table, let people agree or disagree on them up front, not a year after the fact. Well, I didn't know you were going to charge me $140 an hour. And my American friends in the U.S. are listening right now going, $140 an hour. I need a job in Canada. But our charge out rates are into that. For the skilled trades, you're starting to teeter $200 an hour, right?
Yeah.
Because just their base wages plus burdens are coming into $100, right?
Yeah, and it's Canadian dollars too, so it's probably like $50 US.
Depends. It might be at par if we join,
Yeah.
right? I doubt that's going to happen. Daily reports. I've seen enough in my lifetime to go. These are good ones. These are absolute shit ones, and these are ones. Why did you waste the ink in the paper, right? So
Yeah, so we've already touched on those
yeah,
earlier, but yeah, the important things to record is not just what happened, but what was supposed to happen, and what didn't happen. So obviously the typical things, yes, the date, that
weather.
the weather, the list of labor, equipment, materials, but it's really also the areas that you worked in, and then again, this is also a good place. We talked about verbal instructions previously. This is another place where you might say, okay, I was instructed verbally, or we discussed this and this was the outcome. And at least, even if the other side doesn't sign these daily logs or daily reports, at least there's a contemporaneous record of a conversation that I think will be a lot more credible if it gets in front of a judge and arbitrator than just somebody's testimony that what was said 3 or 4 years ago.
Awesome. I know you mentioned to us the idea of having a weekly claim prevention habit. What's a habit that people can get themselves into? Contractors, designers, subcontractors, even owners.
Yeah, I think it's a good habit to get into to spend 15-30 minutes a week just to review of where the project is. What are we talked about RFIs? What are the main unresolved RFIs that might hold things up? Delays, changes, any other issues with access. Um, and don't be, if you're a subcontractor, don't be shy to send a quick email to the GC, basically saying, here, this is what's holding me up this week. This is what needs a decision. And if you're a GC, then you can do the same to the owner or to the consultant. And again, just to have sort of a regular record of what's happening. But I think the more important things, and again, we've touched on these, is to make sure you pick your battles. Like don't throw everything at the other side. Don't try to be as a contractor, because there's two parties on the other side. There's the owner and there's the consultant. And yes, they're sort of on the same side, but they're two different entities. So as a contractor, you want to be seen as the solution and not the problem to the owner, right? So when the owner looks at you, yes, there's always going to be issues, but are you willing to sort of sit down and try to resolve them and be proactive and offer solutions? Or are you just throwing your back up every time and just want to fight?
Yeah, there's a delicate balance between maintaining a bridge and burning it and then blowing it the F up.
Yeah.
Emotionally, you always want to blow it up because you're tired of the same thing over and over again. Practically speaking, you want to hold the bridge together. You and I have been in situations where
Yes.
we've had to use each other's services. I got lawyer friends that'll tell you, hey, listen, you just keep it chilled. And unfortunately, depending on how the financial impacts are, it's hard to keep those emotions away from finances, right?
It is, and especially if you're the owner, if you're a small company, it's your money, and that's where again it comes back to what was also mentioned before: reasons above emotion. A lot of times it's easier said than done, but
Absolutely.
I think that should always be the goal, to try to keep things civil and resolve things as soon as possible and as amicably as possible.
Richard, I want to thank you for your time. Obviously, I want you to tell people where they can find you if they wanted to get some help or are in a bind. I highly, not because Richard's dad and I go way back, but Richard has got extensive amount of experience from a contractor's perspective, which unlike most claims consultants, they've got academic backgrounds. They don't have the theoretical background. So that's why, Richard, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I work for a company called Lakeland Consulting Inc. So you can find us on the internet. We have a website. We've also recently been acquired by a larger Canadian company called SEMA Plus. So you can find me under both of these companies. And it's lakelandconsultinginc.com.
Awesome. Richard, thank you so much for being with us today. I want to ask you now, because I'm putting you on the spot. I would love to do a session just about how to build proper baseline schedules, because I think that in the industry, I'm a sycophant of Steve. He taught me how to build a baseline schedule where he said it's a part of the estimate, is how you build the baseline schedule. You don't build it in a vacuum. You have to look at the dollars and cents. So I think it'd be worthwhile to help educate most people on how to build a schedule, because the reality is it's not a skill that most people have acquired yet.
You can't build an estimate without having at least some idea of the schedule that is corresponding to it.
They're inseparable items.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It was a great pleasure. It was great talking to you. And yes, I hope we'll have a chance to do it again.
Thank you for listening to the Contender's Edge podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.